Francis Hopkinson was a lawyer, a judge, and a politician, and an accomplished musician and composer, and a prolific writer of plays, poetry, and essays, and a designer and inventor. He signed the Declaration of Independence and helped create a flag for the new United States. He was deeply involved in the struggle to create a nation governed by laws rather than by a king. One of Hopkinson's plays was scheduled to be the first one written by an American-born colonist to be performed on the continent in 1767. But his name was not on it. He wrote under the pseudonym Andrew Barton. Barton was a pirate made famous in ballads. Hopkinson's play was called The Disappointment, and its premiere was canceled for reasons I will go into later. The play was a ballad opera, like the famous Beggar's Opera, using well-known folk melodies and writing new words for them to advance the plot. Here is a song from The Disappointment called Banish Sorrow, and Hopkinson used the melody The Jolly Bacchanalian, which means the jolly drinker. Banish sorrow, welcome joy, let's strike up the sprightly dance, mirth abound without alloy, tune your lutes, your pipes advance, sound your notes in lofty strains, join ye nymphs and jovial swains, banish care and be at rest, of a bad bargain make the best. Room for joy, how blessed am I, in a husband and a friend. Virtuous joy shall never die, though our lives will surely end. Virgins all example take, value love for virtue's sake. Constant be as turtle dove, let your theme be virtuous love. Francis's father, Thomas Hopkinson, was born in London in 1709, the son of a scrivener, someone who hand-wrote official documents for a living. Long before the typewriter, good handwriting using a quill dipped into an inkwell was a valuable skill. When Thomas was about 22, in about 1731, he immigrated to the colony of Pennsylvania. He was active in town affairs in Philadelphia and eventually became a merchant, a lawyer, and a judge. He counted among his friends Benjamin Franklin, and together they founded a library for Philadelphia. In 1736, Thomas married Mary Johnson, who had also immigrated from England. She had an impressive pedigree. Her grandfather had been Sergeant at Arms for King Charles II, and her first cousin was the Bishop of Worcester. At their wedding in Philadelphia, Mary was 18 and Thomas was 27. The difference in their ages was typical for the time. The next year, they welcomed their first child, Francis. When little Francis was a year old, he got a sister named Elizabeth. In 1740 came Jane, but she died at birth or soon after. A girl named Mary also died soon after her birth in 1741, and an unnamed boy died in 1742. By then, Francis was 5 years old. Children were fortunate to survive their first years. There were no vaccines for diseases that regularly swept through the population. The connection between germs and disease was unknown. Colonial-era hygiene was casual. There was no plumbing, and water supplies were highly suspect, so people drank a great deal of alcoholic beverages, which they knew were safe. toasts the world over say, "To your health." Later in 1742, Mary and Thomas had another girl, Mary, who would reach adulthood. But in 1744, another boy died at birth. In 1745 came Anne. Like her sisters Elizabeth and Mary, she survived her childhood. In 1747, Mary and Thomas had a boy they named for his father, but he died soon after his birth. Their last child, Margaret, was born in 1749 when Francis was 12. Little Margaret died in 1751 at the age of 2. Mary and Thomas Hopkinson buried 6 children over the years. They were far from alone in this experience. In 1751, Thomas and Ben Franklin opened the Academy of Philadelphia, the city's first institution of higher learning. Francis was its first student. He was 14. He had learned to read and write at home, had studied the Bible, and knew some Latin, so he was a good prospect. Sadly, later that year, Francis lost his father. Thomas and his daughter Margaret may have died in the same epidemic. Mary was left to raise Francis, 14, Elizabeth, 13, Mary, 9, and Anne, 6. Benjamin Franklin wrote a tribute to his friend who had worked with him on experiments involving electricity. Quote, "The power of points to throw off electrical fire was first communicated to me by my ingenious friend, Thomas Hopkinson." Francis spent 8 years at the Academy. Among his studies was learning the harpsichord. His teacher was probably James Bremner, a Scottish musician. Francis earned a Bachelor of Arts in 1757 when he was 20 and performed at his graduation ceremony. 2 years later, he received his master's degree. What did Francis study to earn his Artis Baccalaureate and Artis Magister? He became fluent in Latin and Greek, the bedrocks of an advanced education in his time. He may also have learned some Hebrew. Courses in natural philosophy included arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and other sciences. Moral philosophy was the study of ethics, logic, history, and oratory. Learning to speak well in front of others was an important skill in a world where speeches and sermons were a major form of enlightenment and entertainment, and there were no recordings. In Latin, baccalaureus means bachelor. Medieval scholars thought it came from the phrase bacca lauri, or laurel berry. The degree was a mark of honor, like the laurel wreath that crowned ancient athletes and poets. As in today's poet laureate. A bachelor was a young knight without land, and later a junior member of a guild. A guild of wool merchants or bakers was called a collegium or universitas, which simply meant an organized group. These names led to colleges and universities and the Electoral College. The year that Francis graduated, 1759, he set a poem to music. "My days have been so wondrous free." The words were written by an Irish clergyman named Thomas Parnell. Hopkinson's score was for voice and harpsichord, and the song is considered the first secular work by an American-born composer. My days have been so wondrous free, the little birds that fly with careless ease from tree to tree were but as blessed as I, were but as blessed as I. In 1761, Francis became a lawyer after studying with Benjamin Chew, who was the Attorney General of Pennsylvania. He passed the bar, gaining permission to cross the railing in a courtroom that separated the public from the court officers. There was no written exam. A bar examiner from the local courthouse simply asked you a few questions. If you had read some law books, had a good reputation, and were a man of means, it was pretty easy to pass. A college degree also helped immensely. In May 1761, Francis presented an ode set to music at the commencement of the College of Philadelphia, entitled "Sacred to the Memory of His Late Gracious Majesty George II." It is of tremendous length, but a few lines stand out for me. All things are but dust and earth, even kings themselves, those demigods enthroned, rulers of empire, wagers of war, at whose avenging nod the guilty tremble, nations are doomed, and millions live and die. Even kings themselves are not but dust and earth. That same year, 1761, Francis was appointed secretary to a Pennsylvania delegation that made a treaty with 8 neighboring tribes: the Onondaga, Cayuga, Oneida, Mohegan, Nanticoke, Delaware, Tutelo, and Conoy. Benjamin Chew was there, along with other officials, who met with the chiefs and hundreds of tribal members. Francis wrote a long poem about it called "The Treaty." His poem is set by the Lehigh River, where birds sing and ghosts haunt a cabin destroyed by savages. Francis paints a lurid picture of a bloody attack in which adults were killed and children taken captive. He then praises William Penn's 1683 treaty with the Delaware, made some 70 years before, which had held until recently. Illustrious Penn, still be it thine to bless, not to inflict unnecessary pain. Thine is the skill in soft encircling chains of justice, truth, and charity, to bind the hand that spreads destruction round the plain, and quell the fierceness of the untutored mind. Francis wrote of a painted warrior who spoke nobly, holding a belt of wampum to honor the proceedings. Wampum were leather strips adorned with beads, used as a medium of exchange and a sign that something important was happening. With native luster, how doth reason shine! Science ne'er taught him how to argue best, the schools ne'er strove his language to refine. What noble thoughts, what noble actions rise from inborn genius, unrestrained and free. More pure the council fire begins to glow. He bids the brightened chain of friendship last, long as the sun shall burn or waters flow. An agreement reached, the chiefs accepted gifts and celebrated with races, archery, and a game that sounds much like lacrosse. Clastic is a type of rock. To smite the ball, some wield the massy oak, and send it hissing, bounding o'er the plain, till, counterchecked by repercussive stroke, swift the clastic ball returns again. I think sports announcers should adopt this language. 'Twould be most elegant and edifying to the assembled multitudes. Do you not think it so? 2 years later, Francis was appointed the collector of the king's customs at the port of Salem in New Jersey. He also served as secretary to the Philadelphia Library that had been co-founded by his father, a post he would hold for 7 years. He lived at home with his mother and sisters. He was a member of Christ Church, where he taught the children music and psalms. He was appointed the church secretary in 1763. He played the organ for services and wrote an article on the expected behavior of the ideal church organist. He composed or edited a number of hymns and psalms. In 1763, he published a book of hymn melodies. At one point, Francis and Edward Duffield were in charge of teaching black students to read at Christ Church. Some of the students were free and some of them were enslaved. In 1765, Francis wrote a letter to Ben Franklin, who was in London, addressed, "My dear friend." Among other concerns, he wrote about trying to fix a harpsichord played by Franklin's daughter Sally. "I visited your family the day before yesterday and put Miss Sally's harpsichord in the best order I could. But the instrument is, I think, past recovery. The touch is so uncomfortable that she has but little inducement to practice. And as Miss Sally really plays very well, I think it would be very proper to sell this and buy her a new harpsichord of a more simple construction." Less to go wrong. In 1765, Francis traveled to England, sailing on the Hayfield, a ship owned by a family friend. There he met relatives, including the Bishop of Worcester, whom Franklin had visited to praise young Francis. Francis hoped to get appointed to some government position. He studied art with the painter Benjamin West, spent time with the future Prime Minister Lord North, and wrote some romantic poems. But his connections did not result in a post. After a year, he gave up and came home to his mother's house. He set up a store selling fancy imported items. He offered fabrics of linen, cotton, silk, and wool in varieties called hum-hums, bed bunts, osnabrigs, paduasoys, mantuas, and taffeties. He also sold table carpets, cunningly dyed, and choice port wine. Francis earned a good income from the shop and also from conveyancing, examining titles and drawing up deeds for selling property. He also wrote a play called The Disappointment, or The Force of Credulity, which was scheduled to premiere in 1767, billed as the first drama by an American-born author. At this time, people often wrote under false names. Francis could switch writing styles so skillfully that he could take both sides of an argument in different essays without anyone being the wiser. He delighted in fooling people into thinking that he was two different people arguing in subsequent issues of the newspaper. His most frequent pen name was A.B., Andrew Barton, the pirate. After he became a lawyer, his favorite became Andrew Barton, Esquire. Over the years, Francis used at least 30 pseudonyms. The Disappointment was to be performed by the American Company of Comedians in Philadelphia. But just 2 days before opening night, a notice in the Philadelphia Gazette announced that it had been canceled because it, quote, contains personal reflections and is unfit for the stage. These reflections involved a joke played on some Philadelphia residents who had been duped into trying to dig up buried treasure. Certain they would be recognized, they demanded to be spared public ridicule, and the producers caved. In colonial times, there was a mania for trying to locate buried treasure. Legends abounded that pirates had buried hoards of gold and jewels all over the place. People looked for clues in their dreams, in charms and superstitions, in astrology, consulting the stars and heading out on moonlit nights at midnight, hoping to be guided to fortune. The merchant roams from clime to clime, regardless of his pleasure. To hardships and fatigue resigns when in pursuit of treasure, and a-digging we will go, and a-digging we will go. See now the lucky hour, it comes with pickaxe and with spade. A little digging, oh my sons, and then our fortune's made, and a-digging we will go, and a-digging we will go. Let's boldly venture on the ground and seize the glorious chest. No joy on earth like gold is found to ease the human breast, and a-digging we will go, and a-digging we will go, and a-digging we will go, and a-digging we will go. This was a major factor in the plot of The Disappointment, or The Force of Credulity, credulity being the willingness to believe silly things. The play was published later that year and widely read, but it has been performed only twice. In 1935, as part of a Depression-era bid to employ theater workers, and in 1976 to celebrate the bicentennial. Both productions made incorrect assumptions about a key character, and many of their musical choices were odd or just plain wrong. It did not help that the script never gave any musical notation, only titles of existing melodies to use for the new words. The theater faced many hurdles in colonial America. The Quakers of Philadelphia saw it as a frivolous waste of time, for them the ultimate sin. Other religious leaders condemned it for shady plots and characters of questionable morality. The Sons of Liberty hated the English origins of American plays, and in 1766 they burned down the theater of the American Company of Comedians in New York, aroused by the abundance of English actors. Philadelphia's growing middle class was another obstacle. Tailors, carpenters, and other skilled tradesmen resented the ostentatious gentility of the theater, and as Quakers they believed that everyone should be on the same social level. All these religious, political, and socio-economic challenges doomed Francis's play. Whereas the Baker's Opera aimed sharp satire at those in power, calling out corruption and hypocrisy, The Disappointment poked gentler fun at the greed and gullibility of common men. It parodied recent immigrants to the colonies. Trooshoop, a tangle-tongued Irishman, McSnip, an excitable Scot, Washball, an elderly barber much concerned with his English pedigree, and Raccoon, a retired German soldier who overestimates his virility and courage. The character of Raccoon was long misinterpreted. His dialogue was written in what looked to later generations like Black dialect, but was actually Pennsylvania Dutch, who were German or Deutsch, misrepresented as Dutch. Other plays of the time used similar dialect for their German characters. A century later, raccoon or coon became an insult to Black Americans, compounding the confusion, but in the 1700s that slur did not yet exist. Carolyn Rabson of the University of Illinois, writing in the journal American Music in 1983, deftly untangled a long trail of errors and demonstrated that Raccoon is indeed a German character. She also identified the original intended melodies, not an easy task. Here is another song from The Disappointment. Now let us join hands and unite in this cause. 'Tis glorious goal that will gain us applause. How blessed now are we with such treasure in store. We'll clothe all the naked and feed all the poor. We'll clothe all the naked and feed all the poor. We'll clothe all the naked and feed all the poor. How happy for me to this country I came. You all, my dear friends, can now witness the same. In wealth to abound, oh, the thought is most sweet. No more will I write for 1 farthing a sheet. No more will I write for 1 farthing a sheet. No more will I write for 1 farthing a sheet. Francis began courting a young woman in New Jersey. He probably met her while he was working in that colony as a customs collector. Anne Borden lived in Bordentown, probably named after her family. Her father, Joseph, owned many businesses and much property and had a pile of money. In 1768, Francis married into this influential family, and in 1769, he and Anne had a son they named James. The next year, Joseph was born, and in 1772, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth. Although Francis was a successful businessman and lawyer, he still longed to hold a government post. Soon after his 3rd child was born, he became collector of His Majesty's customs for the port of Newcastle upon Delaware. This let him buy 1,000 acres in Pennsylvania, a tract known as Putney Common, from John Penn, grandson of the colony's founder. Francis Hopkinson enslaved at least 2 people. His wealth made it possible, and his growing family motivated him to gain the services of people without having to pay them. In 1773, he and Anne had another daughter named Maria. The next year, the family moved to Anne's hometown in New Jersey. In Bordentown, they built a house across the street from her father. It's still there. Francis continued his writing and music, and neighbors often gathered outside the windows when he played his spinet. In 1774, Francis published A Pretty Story, a thinly veiled criticism of the way King George was mismanaging his colonies. He published A Pretty Story as a pamphlet under the pen name Peter Grievous, Esquire, stressing the grievousness or severity of his complaints against the crown. In 1775, Anne and Francis had a son, Thomas, named for Francis's father. That year, their first son, James, died at age 6. And the next year, in 1776, little Thomas also died. In June 1776, Francis was chosen as one of 3 New Jersey delegates to Congress. He immediately resigned from his positions serving the crown. There had been no fighting yet in New Jersey, and the colony had not yet authorized its delegates to vote for independence. New Jersey's royal governor was William Franklin. His father, Ben Franklin, would suffer much heartache from his son's loyalty to Britain. The New Jersey Provincial Congress authorized them to vote for independence and also ordered the imprisonment of Governor William Franklin. The next month, Francis signed the Declaration of Independence, inking his name onto a treasonous document, risking his life, family, and fortune. It seemed unlikely that the colony could prevail against the might of Britain, but they would attempt it. Francis was a member of Congress for only 5 months. He left to serve on the Navy Board in Philadelphia. In November 1776, British and Hessian forces invaded New Jersey and occupied Bordentown. Anne and her children watched redcoats march past the house. Joseph was 6, Elizabeth was 4, and Maria was 3. On Christmas night, Washington crossed the Delaware and gained an amazing victory at Trenton. Francis helped create the Great Seal of New Jersey. He also designed a flag for what they hoped would be the new United States, with 13 red and white stripes and a blue canton with white 6-pointed stars. There is little evidence that Betsy Ross created the flag or that George Washington was involved. No image exists of the Hopkinson flag, but it set the style for the stars and stripes adopted in 1777. That year, Anne and Francis had a girl named after her mother who would live to be 91. Francis greatly admired Washington. In 1778, he wrote both the words and the music of A Toast. Twice in 1778, British forces attacked Bordentown, including the house of Anne's father just across the street. Joseph Borden was a target because he was a colonel in the militia. The Hopkinson home was spared because British officers admired its large library, then occupied the house while in the town. In 1778, the British in Philadelphia harbor were terrified to see kegs filled with gunpowder floating towards their ships. The kegs actually did no damage, but Francis wrote a song poking fun at the British's wild overreaction. He did not write new music, but directed his words to be sung to Yankee Doodle. He mentions Mrs. Loring. Betsy Loring was reputed to be the mistress of General William Howe, commander of the British forces. Howe brought her to Philadelphia from Boston, where he had met her and her husband Joshua, both loyalists. Mr. Loring did not seem to mind the arrangement, as long as he could hang on to his lucrative appointment as commissioner of prisoners. Howe was roundly criticized for lingering in Philadelphia rather than attacking rebel forces. Gallants attending here a forentrill fourth harmonious ditty. Strange things I'll tell which late befell in Philadelphia city. was early day, as poets say, just when the sun was rising. A soldier stood on a log of wood and saw a sight surprising. As in a maze he stood to gaze, the truth can't be denied, sir. He spied a score of kegs or more come floating down the tide, sir. A sailor too in jerkin blue, the strange appearance viewing, first damned his eyes in great surprise, then said some mischief's brewing. These kegs now hold the rebels bold, packed up like pickled herring, and they're come down to attack the town in this new way of ferrying. The soldier flew, the sailor too, and scared almost to death, sir, wore out their shoes to spread the news and ran till out of breath, sir. Now up and down throughout the town most frantic scenes were acted. Some ran here and some ran there like men almost distracted. Some fire cried, which some denied, but said the earth had quaked, and girls and boys with hideous noise ran through the town half naked. Sir William, he snug as a flea, lay all this time a-snoring, nor dreamed of harm as he lay warm in bed with Mrs. Loring. In a fright he starts upright, wakened by the clatter. He rubs his eyes and boldly cries, "For God's sakes, what's the matter?" At his bedside he then espied Sir Erskine in command, sir. Upon one foot he had a boot, then t'other in his hand, sir. "Arise, arise," Sir Erskine cries, "the rebels, more's the pity, without a boat are all on float and range before the city. Motley crews in vessels new, with Satan for their guide, sir, packed up in bags or wooden kegs, come driving down the tide, sir. Therefore prepare for bloody war, these kegs must all be routed, or surely we despised shall be, and British courage doubted. The royal band now ready stand, all ranged in dread array, sir, with stomach stout to see it out and make a bloody day, sir. The cannons roar from shore to shore, the small arms make a rattle. Since wars began, I'm sure no man e'er saw so strange a battle. The fish below swam to and fro, attacked from every quarter. I sure thought they the devils to pay monks spoke above the water. Morn to night these men of might displayed amazing courage, and when the sun was fairly down, retired to sup their porridge. 100 men with each a pen or more, upon my word, sir, it is most true should be too few their valor to record, sir. Such feats did they perform that day upon these wicked kegs, sir. For years to come, if they get home, they'll make their boasts and brags, sir. In 1779, Anne had another boy. They reused the name Thomas, but this baby did not live long. Francis was a judge in the Admiralty Court of Pennsylvania. In 1780, 3 years before the war ended, he was accused of taking bribes and trading in false certificates. He was acquitted in an impeachment trial and remained in office. In 1781, he and Anne had another boy. They named him Francis, and he would live until 1823, dying at age 42. In 1781, Francis wrote the lyrics for an opera called America Independent, or The Temple of Minerva. It was performed for French officers on their way to Yorktown in 1781. Francis was dissatisfied with the tone of the typical harpsichord, and he exchanged letters with Thomas Jefferson, exploring ways to improve it. Instead of using crow feather quills to pluck the strings, he used quills with metal tongues, then tried leather quills, and finally settled on velvet cork. In the 1780s, he made a keyboard for Ben Franklin's glass harmonica, and he also invented the bell harmonica, an instrument using metal bells. His experience designing seals led him to help create the Great Seal of the United States, working with over a dozen collaborators. The seal was approved in 1782. Hopkinson also designed the Continental $50 bill. The war ended in 1783. In 1784, Anne and Francis had a girl named Sarah, who died in 1785. Francis worked on getting the Constitution ratified. In 1788, he wrote The New Roof, a song for federal mechanics. Hopkinson was a member of the Pennsylvania Convention that ratified the Constitution. He chaired a committee of arrangement that organized a grand celebration on July 4th, 1788. He was prominent in a huge parade that included members of 44 trades and professions, in addition to military units and many politicians. In 1788, Francis published 7 songs for the harpsichord and dedicated it to Washington. Francis may have hoped to be appointed chief court musician to the president, but he was not. The songs did inspire George to order a harpsichord for Martha's granddaughter, Nellie Custis. For Washington's inauguration in 1789, a captured Hessian musician named Philip File composed a piece called The President's March. Francis's 19-year-old son, Joseph, wrote words for it, and it became Hail Columbia. By the 1800s, Hail Columbia was the unofficial national anthem. The current anthem would not become official until 1931. Columbia, a name related to Columbus, was for centuries a personification of first the New World and then the United States. She was displaced by the Statue of Liberty when Lady Liberty went up in 1886. But we still know of her in the District of Columbia and the gorgeous woman in the logo of Columbia Pictures. The song always starts with 4 ruffles and flourishes, the fanfare we hear before Hail to the Chief. In 1790, when Benjamin Franklin died, Francis wrote an ode sacred to the memory of Dr. Franklin, which was performed at the College of Philadelphia. Francis's words were set to the English tune Flow, Thou Sweet Afton. It was the first piece of music to be printed with musical notation in an American newspaper. The ode was one of Hopkinson's last works. In May 1791, he fell ill and died, probably of a stroke. He was buried at Christ Church in Philadelphia. Anne made a mourning brooch that contained a lock of his hair. Anne lived another 36 years. Francis's son, Joseph, who like his father enjoyed composing music, became a member of the House of Representatives and a federal judge. To end the tale of Francis Hopkinson and his amazingly versatile life, I give you this cynical, sly song from The Disappointment. His lyrics point out the lack of integrity that appears from the great to the little, and in the bench, bar, and pulpit. Everyone from noblemen to servants, and especially lawyers, judges, and ministers, can be swayed by gold. Centuries later, nothing has changed. Sure, Gold is the Fuel is sung to the tune Black Joke and Belly So White, a scandalous title referring to lady parts. In the play, it is sung by Moll Placket, a practical businesswoman. She has no illusions about what makes the world go round. Sure gold is the fuel that kindles the fire and serves for to fan up a woman's desire for a fumbling fool that's decrepit and old. For in all scenes of life, from the great to the little, the bench, bar, and pulpit, it suits to a tittle. You're surely condemned if you haven't the gold. But if you have money, ne'er mind what your cause is, but tickle their palms and you'll gain their applauses. No statesman so great, so cunning and bold, but will truckle to you for the sake of your gold. But if you lack that, you are certainly sold. But hang this disappointment. Let women of business take care of their men. If one won't suffice them, why let them have 10?